Okay, everyone. We are going to discuss in this short lecture, short by our standards anyway. We are in chapter 11 of Bill Mounce's book, Basics of Biblical Greek Grammar. For those of you that aren't enrolled in the class but are trying to keep up, this is the textbook that we're using. And we're going to discuss chapter 11 in Dr. Mounce's book, which is first and second personal pronouns. And then we've covered some third declension stems, some third declension nouns. And for the last probably two lectures, and we're going to just introduce a few more. We're not going to beat them to death. I think at this point in the course, you understand that for these third declension stems, you need to be familiar with them. You need to memorize the paradigm. Obviously, where you can, make connections where you can between the paradigms so they're easier to remember. But unfortunately, I can't make it easier for you in the lecture. It's just something that you have to hammer out on your own. So let's go ahead and take a look at first and second first and second personal pronouns. Pronouns in Greek are going to act just like they act in English. And a pronoun is going to replace a noun. So if I'm holding a ball and I say, it is red, then it is the pronoun and it is referring to the ball. Personal pronoun I should have learned Hebrew. That should probably read, I took Hebrew and I should have learned Hebrew while I was taking it. That would probably be more appropriate for me. Or something like, I took Hebrew and got a passing grade, and I don't remember anything about Hebrew. That would probably be even more appropriate. So when it comes to pronouns, you have personal pronouns, they replace a noun, and then relative to the pronoun is the antecedent. The antecedent is the word that the pronoun refers to. So it is red. It, which you don't have in the sentence, the antecedent is implied, but it would be the ball or whatever noun it's referring to. And in English, you have first, second, third person pronouns. So when it comes to Greek, you have forms of pronouns, and when it comes to translating the pronoun correctly, you have to consider case, number, and person. There is no gender to remember. And case is going to be determined by the function in the sentence. So how does the pronoun function in the sentence? For example, if the pronoun is the subject, you would use I instead of me. So I should have done a better job learning Hebrew. I is the pronoun. It's the subject. I would not say me should have done a better job learning Hebrew, because that's not good English, right? So the case, and we're going to look at a paradigm in just a minute, but the case of the pronoun is going to be determined by its use in the sentence, its function in the sentence. The number and the person of the pronoun is going to depend on its antecedent. Now, all of this sounds like it's going to be difficult, but it's not. You'll see what I mean in just a minute. And as I mentioned, we're only talking about first and second person personal pronouns in this lecture. There is no gender that you have to remember for first and second person. So here, just for comparisons, here's an English paradigm of the English personal pronouns. You have I, my, me, we, our, us, you, your, you in singular, and you, your, you in plural. All right? And here is the Greek paradigm for that same that same structure that you have in English. So ego, which you have already learned as a vocabulary word, is I. That is first person, I. Mu or emu, and we're going to talk about why you would see mu versus emu. That's in the genitive, so that would be of, me, and my. Um, and we're going to look at a sentence in a few minutes using emu, and I'm going to tell you how I typically translate the genitive when it comes to personal pronouns. But of, me, or my. Moi, to me. Me, or eme, me. Second person singular. Su will be you. Su, your. Soy, to you. Se, you. And then for first person plural, you see the rough breathing mark above the eta. Hey mace, hey mon, hey men, hey mas. And then you look at the second person plural, you've got another rough breathing mark above the upsilon. Who mace, who mon, who men, who mas. So let's take a look, let's back up from 30,000 feet, and let's look at all of these pronouns. Look at ego and look at su. But now look at mu, which is singular genitive, and mu, which is singular genitive, and su, which is genitive plural. The only difference is one begins with a sigma, the other begins with a meta, right? And you see, so when you look at this, if you can get past the panic of having to learn something new, and you just take a look at this, you can see that there's not a lot of new stuff to remember in terms of paradigm. This is a pretty easy paradigm, and pronouns are used quite a bit in Greek in the same way that they're used in English quite a bit. And so you're going to have to know these. These are going to show up quite a bit. Okay, we've already said this. We've already said that case is determined by function and number and person is determined by the antecedent. So I'm going to go back to the paradigm. And what we're talking about is that and this has more to do with, it has something to do with translation. Don't get me wrong. This is one of those, really finer points of translation that would help you when you're preparing sermons and lessons, and really to understand the nuances of the New Testament writer. So you have an emphatic form in Greek, and sometimes that emphatic form is illustrated through an accent mark. Other times, such as with these pronouns, it changes the form of the actual word. So mu or emu, I say emu, but emu, you see the addition of the epsilon. If you're translating a sentence, you're going to translate mu or emu the same, either of, me, or my, because it's first person genitive, singular. But the difference is in when you're understanding the meaning. If you see mu versus emu, you know that emu means that in that sentence, the writer wants to highlight and wants to emphasize of, me, or my, or I, not I, because I doesn't have an emphatic form. But this is unfortunately something that you have to remember, but it doesn't change the translation. It only matters in terms of interpretation when you're trying to get the gist of what the writer is trying to say. And the only reason you're having to learn this is because this emphatic form, does show up in the New Testament. And so it's something that you want to remember. When it comes to parsing personal pronouns, take mu, for instance. That is genitive, singular, second person. from ego. Now, here's the thing. Remember that in Greek, we want the gender, which you don't have in pronouns, right? So skip that. You want gender, case, number, inflected meaning, which would be what the word means, and then you want the lexical form. And the lexical form up to this point is always the nominative singular. So let's go back to this chart. Every word on this chart, now not every teacher does it this way, but this is the way I want you to do it because I think it helps you to remember the pronouns. And this is the way I learned it from two different teachers, one in college, one in graduate school. So I think this way is probably how most people do it. But every pronoun on this slide, you're going to skip the gender, right? You're going to look at the case, the person, and then the meaning and the lexical form of all these pronouns that you see on this slide is going to be ego. So if I tell you to parse Hamas, right? You're going to say that that is, let's go back to the parsing so you know, you're going to say that that is accusative. Let's get the order right. You're going to say this is accusative, first person plural, us, from ego. Hope that makes sense. So you're always going to go back to ego, which means I, for your personal pronouns. You would not go to hey mace. So you're not going to go to, if it's se, your lexical form is not going to be su. It's always going to be ego. And that's just a personal preference. So we just covered this. You're going to translate these personal pronouns just like you would translate them in English. If it's the subject or direct object, you're going to treat it as such. And if it's genitive, you're going to treat it like any other possession. And I think I may have covered this in a previous lecture. But let's look at the phrase curios mu, right? So curios is masculine, nominative, singular, Lord from curios. So we translate that Lord. So mu is going to be genitive, singular, first person, of me or my, from ego. And we're going to translate it. You can do either one. You can either translate it of me, or you could translate it my. I translate all genitive as of me. So in the case of curios mu, you would either translate that Lord of me or my Lord. If you think about Thomas, when Thomas saw the risen Lord, and he had made the statement, unless I touch his hands and see his side, I'm not going to believe. I just can't believe that someone would come back from the dead on their own. Jesus shows up and says, "What's up, bud? There's hands, here's side." Stephen's reply is, depending on your translation, my Lord and my God. All right? My Lord and my God. You could also translate that Lord of me and God of me. So it just depends on your preference, whatever you want to do. The reason that I translated of me is because it helps me to remember, when I was learning Greek, it helps me to remember that genitive always means possession. And of me or of you or of whatever indicates possession. You do whatever you want to do. But I typically, even if I change it, right? Even if I write it down on a piece of paper, my Lord, in my head, I always translate genitive of whatever. So you could either write curios mu as Lord of me or my Lord. Okay, and that's it for first and second person personal pronouns. We have a few more third declension nouns in this lecture. I'm not going to beat them to death. But here's the first one, charis, which means grace. When you read through Paul's letters and he talks about the charismata, the gifts of grace, and you think about the charismatic church, it is the charismatic movement is a movement that emphasizes the charismatic gifts, which are gifts of grace. So charis means grace. One thing I do want you to notice when you're going over your vocabulary words, and I think those vocabulary words start on page 117. We're going to go over them in just a minute. But like in the case of charis, you're going to see that that Dr. Mounce writes out charis and caritas. When it's a third declension noun, he is listing the nominative and the genitive case. So everything else, you're essentially going to get the nominative case. But just so that you know what you're looking at the top of the slide, you have charis and caritas, hey, right? And that charit is the stem. What he's teaching you when you look over this lesson is there's a couple of different third declension nouns that he's covering in this chapter. The first one, or the first two, are nouns that the stem ends in tau and delta. And when it ends in tau and delta, it drops out and you get a sigma in the nominative case. So you'll never see the word charit. Even though that's the stem, you'll see charis, and you'll learn it as charis. Same thing with phos and elpis. Same thing as sarke, right? We're going to look again in just a minute at another third declension that does something special with an iota, but you're not going to memorize the rule. You're just going to memorize the declension. That's all. And so that's what we're doing with these third declensions. So the first one is charis, which means grace. You can see charis is the nominative. Caritas is the genitive. Phos and photos. The stem is phot. The tau drops off, and it picks up a sigma. It means light. Phos is the nominative. Photos is the genitive. You don't have to memorize the genitive. I mean, you do because you need to memorize you need to memorize the declension or the paradigm. But the reason I think it's good to understand why Dr. Mounce puts those two together is when you are looking through vocabulary and you see your vocabulary words and you see next to it another form, then that's a clue that it's a third declension. So phos, photos, means light. Elpis means hope. Again, you have the duh sound, the delta drops off, and in Greek it picks up a sigma. Elpis is a nominative, elpidos is the genitive. So this is what I was talking about with the iota. So and you can read this on page 116 in the textbook, but in Greek you have some words that appear and the stem ending in an iota, and we refer to that as a consonantal iota stem, and it's part of the Greek that precedes the Greek we're learning. It's a holdover from an older Greek that sort of made its way into the new Greek. Doesn't really change the meaning. It's about how the word was spoken and how it just was a holdover from an older version of Greek. So it's not really a rule you need to learn. That's just kind of to help you understand why. But similar to the tau or the delta, that duh or t sound, that sort of rough sound, the iota doesn't drop, but it adds the sigma And you can see just if you're speaking, piste versus pistis is easier to say. The Greek language doesn't like to end a word in an awkward or rough way. And so this is speculation, but I would imagine that the Greek that preceded Koine Greek had made the decision that pistis was easier to say than piste. And I agree. So pistis just means faith. Pistus is the genitive of faith. Here's one that's going to be fairly easy to remember for you. Patir means father. That's where we get the word patriarch from. Patir. And then Hodor. If you've seen Game of Thrones, you remember the character Hodor, where he's holding the door, Hodor. This is not Hodor, it's Hodor and Hudatas, which means water. You can see the stem ends in a towel, and in this case, it drops that towel and adds a row. Again, there's a reason, but it doesn't matter. You just have to memorize it. That Hodor means water, Hudatas of water, Hudate, two or four water, Hodor in the accusative, water. Okay, so let's look at the vocabulary words, and we are almost done with this lesson. So here's a word you're going to see a lot. It's adelphos. It actually shows up 343 times in the New Testament. It means brother, adelphos. So this word, on, is untranslatable. I'll just read what Dr. Mounce has to say about on. It is an untranslatable, uninflected particle used to make a definite statement contingent upon something. Maybe it changes who to whoever, but you usually can't translate it. Well, great. What do I do with that? Nothing. If you see it in a sentence, you just don't translate it. Well, why am I learning it? Glad you asked. Because it shows up in the New Testament 166 times. That's why. Because we're turning you into Bible translators. All right. Anir, andros, that means male or husband or man, typically husband. In the context would be husband, usually. Ecclesia, I cringe that I have to teach you to translate ecclesia, church. If you've taken me for ecclesiology, then you know the history of the word, and it doesn't really mean church. It means assembly, but we've changed it so that it means church. Just forget all that. In this class, if you want to, just translate it church, because that's probably the easiest thing to do. So ecclesia, that means church, assembly, or congregation. The more correct translation is assembly, but if you want to translate it church and want to be wrong and want to be judged by me, then just use church. Elpis, hope or expectation. Exo, that is an adverb, means without. If it's a preposition in the genitive case, it means outside. Similar meaning, without and outside. Epi has a few different meanings based on the case. You can see there in the genitive, it means on, over, or when. In the dative, on the basis of or at. In the accusative, on, to, or against. These words always threw me hard when I was taking Greek, because I only wanted to memorize one definition and move on with my life. And then you have stuff like this that just throws you for a loop. But you got to learn it. There's a rough breathing mark there. We recognize this from the previous paradigm for personal pronouns. Hey, Mace means we. Not sure why he includes just we in the vocabulary unless he plans on making a lot of sentences out of it. Let's see how many times it shows up. Maybe that's why. Let's see. 863 times in the New Testament. That's probably why. All right. Ide or ide You know how you want to say it? Ide is more proper. See, behold. Idu, see, behold. Both of those words mean the same thing. Ide appears in the New Testament 29 times, and idu appears 200 times. So idu is the form that you will probably see the most. Kalos or kalos means good and beautiful, or good or beautiful. Matir, matros, that is mother. Think matriarchy, mother. Ude means and not even, neither, nor. So it's a negative. There's patir, means father. There's pistis again, faith, belief, trust, teaching. I would translate it as just faith. There's water, hudor. Humes is the plural form of you. Photos means light. Charis, we've already covered, means grace. And hode means here. So that is first and second personal pronouns and more third declension nouns. So I hope that is all clear as mud. Stick to your workbook exercises, and I will see you for the next lecture. Have a good night.